A case out of Houston making big news. March 24, 2010. Chad Holley, a 16-year-old young man, not in school at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Part of a burglary ring. This is all evidence, not opinion. Burgling homes in a neighborhood. The police department set up a watch. They see them coming out of a home. They proceed to try to grab the bad guys. Chad Holley, one of the bad guys, begins to run. They're throwing stuff away. One of the officers says, "Hey, I'm pulling up my pants." I mean, one of the guys running away is Chad Holley. And the officer thinks he's got a weapon, but in fact, he's pulling up his pants. He jumps over a police car, lands on the ground. Andrew Blomberg's the first officer on the scene. Well, the video of all this is caught by a storage unit sent to the police department. Case proceeds. There are 4 different individuals. The first case tried, arguably, is the guy with the easiest case to win, and he does win. He wins today. He's determined to be not guilty. His attorney is Dick DeGuerin. It turns out that the suspect in all this, who's now the burglar, who's been convicted, the 16-year-old at the time, is Chad Holley. The officer is Andrew Blomberg. Andrew and his attorney, Dick DeGuerin, are our guest. Andrew, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me on.
What happened?
Well, that day, we got a call from the tactical unit. Said they were watching some burglars doing some shopping, which means they were casing houses. Said they needed some assistance. They didn't have enough unmarked units to keep following them, and they needed more units for the takedown because there was 4 of them. So they called us up, said, "Hey, can y'all come assist us?" And we said, "Yeah, we'd be more than happy to." Went and got set up in the marked patrol car down a bayou where they couldn't see us, and listened to the unmarked units on the patrol radio, and waited for the call to do the takedown.
And the takedown means when the bad guys come out, you nab them.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
So when you arrive on the scene, Chad Holley's already jumped over another police car. He's down on the ground, and you believe he has a weapon underneath him.
Yes, sir.
Turns out he didn't have a weapon underneath him. If he did, would you have gone to trial?
I seriously doubt I would have.
If he'd been laying on Tech 9, we wouldn't have had this conversation?
I think it would have been a completely different story.
So your foot at some point touches the back of his hand. Is that right?
I placed my foot down in the crook of his arm, and I'm sure my foot touched his shoulder and part of his body.
And why'd you do that?
Well, I didn't want to get down on the ground with him at the time because I was the first one there. And looking at the video now, I can see how many officers were approaching. But at the time, I was focused on him and on his hands, and I didn't want to get down on the ground with him yet.
You stand over this kid for 3.7 seconds.
Yes, sir.
Only 3.7 seconds, and then you run away. Why?
Well, as soon as everybody piled in there, I saw that there was 4 or 5 officers on top of him. And from my position, I could see the suspect vehicle still, and I could see the driver was still in it, and an officer was struggling to get him out, one officer. So I made the split-second decision that, hey, these 4 or 5 guys should be able to get him, Mr. Holley, and then, I bolt out of there and go try to help arrest the driver.
At the end of this incident, when both of these bad guys are cuffed, put into their cars, and driven away, do you think you're ever going to account for this day again? Do you think that anyone's ever going to have a problem with this?
No, sir. I walked away from it thinking, this was just another burglary arrest, and we went on to, go try to make another arrest that day.
Most legal experts, and I've asked a lot of opinions, would say your case is very different than some of the other cases, and each of the 4 individual officers has a different case to prove or disprove, but that yours was the easiest. You had the least culpability, if any, that most people thought you were going to walk free. Were you surprised by the verdict?
I wasn't surprised, no. I thought it was the right thing because, again, I walked away from that day not thinking I had done anything wrong, that I had just done my job.
Michael, I wouldn't say that it was the easiest. By far, I think that the prosecution threw everything they could at us because we agreed and asked to go first. I wanted to do that because I had confidence that what Andrew did was justified and righteous, and so I don't think it was the easiest case. In fact, going at it the first time, the prosecutors did everything they could.
Well, but legal experts tell me that in terms of culpability, if there were going to be any for the four, then if you were to compare them, then Andrew would have the easiest case because he's there for just a split moment, and he's attempting, most people would argue, he's probably attempting to clear the guy's hands because he's the first one on the scene. So I think, at least other people tell me, if you were defending a case, this would be the first one you'd want to defend. Andrew, when you heard the news that the police department had fired you,
yes,
what was your immediate reaction to that?
That tore me up. That was all I'd ever wanted to do all my life, was be a police officer, and specifically a Houston police officer.
My understanding is your dad's is a retired officer, your brother's a San Diego officer.
Yes, sir.
At 2.5 years, you were promoted to field training officer, which strict rules requires 3 years unless the police chief himself approves it. First in your class at the academy, first in your class in everything you've ever done. I mean, this has to. Do you feel betrayed by the police department?
When you say the police department, I feel betrayed by the upper echelon, I guess. But the guys that I worked with, those have been the most supportive guys, and that's what I really miss about the department, was the guys I worked with.
And do you want to continue to be a police officer?
I do. I do, but we'll see what happens from here.
For people who see the video, and you're the guy for those, and I encouraged people to watch the video before hearing our show today. For people who see that video, what's the most important thing they need to know that you can't see in that small clip from your for just in terms of your culpability?
Well, they can't see his arm, resisting my attempts to pull it back. You can't see that from the video at all. But he locks his arms up and he will not move them.
In one of the conversations I had earlier today with an officer about this, he said, well, Michael, you have to remember it's important to note that at the time this was you would assume that a guy that's part of a burglary ring and a member of a gang, which he admitted he was, would have been arrested before, so he would know the procedure. He wasn't following procedure of how you properly get arrested, which is put your hands down around your lower back.
Yes, sir.
And they said, well, that's an important fact because by keeping his hands up around his head, the hands have to be put down around the lower back in order to be cuffed. Keeping them around his head, you've got to keep your hand on your gun. You've got to keep yourself in a position to get those hands down low.
Correct. That's one thing the video doesn't show is as I'm running up to him, I yell at him, "Put your hands behind your back." And you can't hear that on the video, but he does not do it. He does not follow my commands.
And
well,
what you were
correct you, Michael, one thing. He denied being a member of a gang when I asked him that on the witness stand. But we had plenty of evidence that if he wasn't then a member of the gang, he certainly has associated with gang members since then.
And do we know what he was doing at 1 o'clock on the afternoon on a school day at 16 years old?
Yeah, he was casing people's residences to break in during the day while they were gone.
My understanding, well, he was actually in the commission of a burglary, as I understand it. And my understanding is the gang lingo for this particular gang is going shopping.
Going shopping and hit a lick.
Hit a lick. Okay, all right, like a praline log. Andrew, any regrets? Would you do it all? My understanding is in trial you said I wouldn't do a thing differently.
No, sir. You can't go back and second guess your actions, especially as a police officer. Everything unfolds rapidly, and you make split-second decisions. There's no second guessing on my part. I think I did everything right, and I would do everything the same again. So
you're an enforcer of the law. You're a guy who believes in the law. You enforce the law.
Yes, sir.
It's what you've done. It's what you've always done. You tell me it's what you've always wanted to do. Do you still believe in the process?
I do. I think today it showed that the process actually works.
But why were you in trial earlier today?
Well,
What went wrong?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think I have all the answers for that. I don't know who was, behind it and who wanted, to see us go to trial.
I can answer that. It was politically expedient for the police department and the mayor's office to press for prosecution of all of the officers, and they failed on some of the officers. That the grand jury said, no, we're not going to indict them, but they pressed so hard on Andrew and 3 others that they got the indictments. And we're not condemning these other officers, and we're not defending the other officers, but I can understand what's going on, and they struggled for a full minute.
Dick, we're up against a break. I think you have to go, am I right? Or can you stay? Okay. All right, guys, thanks for being with us. Andrew Blomberg and Dick DeGuerin. We'll talk more about this case coming up.
The Michael Berry Show.